actually be breaking the rules. So I guess maybe Randy and Michael are not firstborns, and instead are rabble-rousers. But they don't want to go in the usual order of presenter and then commentator. Instead, they want to go commentator and then presenter, which should mix things up nicely. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Michael Kent Curtis.
This is Randy's idea. I did not suggest it, but I'm happy to do it. I think this is really a splendid and interesting paper that moves us forward in a lot of ways in terms of understanding the connection between anti-slavery thought and the 14th Amendment. What Randy's done in his paper, for those of you who have not read it, is he's looked at the 14th Amendment clause by clause, and he's then looked at a whole group of anti-slavery thinkers, and what he finds is a remarkable similarity between the ideas of these anti-slavery thinkers and the phrases of the 14th Amendment. So what he suggests is this is part of the background or public meaning of the 14th Amendment. The other thing he does in his paper is he looks at these thinkers and he treats the abolitionist constitutionalists. Really, there are two groups, of course. They're the groups who think that the Constitution is an anti-slavery document. And then there are the groups like the Garrisonians who think it's a pro-slavery document. And then the anti-slavery constitutionalists are divided, for me, in the radicals who think slavery is unconstitutional everywhere, even in Alabama, and the moderates who think it's unconstitutional in the federal territories, but constitutional in the original states. So I think the other thing Randy does is he looks at methods of constitutional interpretation. He says these anti-slavery constitutionalists, the one who think the Constitution is anti-slavery, are basically people who look at the public meaning, he says, of the words, as opposed to history, intent, that sort of thing. And as to the radicals, they're very clearly statements ruling out history and, newspapers and all sorts of things. They've got this narrower definition. So I think this is a wonderful paper, and it really moves us forward. And now I'm going to give some areas in which I have some reservations about it. The first is the snuffing out. He suggests that the work of William Nelson and Robert Cover has basically sort of snuffed out and extinguished the link between the anti-slavery constitutionalism and the 14th Amendment. As one of the people who would have been snuffed out, I have some reservations about this. And so I attempted to do a sort of a rough quantitative way of looking at the snuffing out. So I looked at this book called No State Shall Abridge, which was all about how the crusade against slavery shaped the 14th Amendment, cites a couple of anti-slavery thinkers and Joel Tiffany at great length, and draws the connections with Bingham and so on. And I looked at the citations of William Nelson's book, and what I found is that even my book was a few years before, but Nelson's book has been cited 343 times, but my book's been cited 370 times since Nelson wrote his book, not counting the prior cites. But that's not the clincher. Akil Amar, in his book, The Bill of Rights, makes the same connections. Akil Amar's book has been cited 1,300 times. So I don't think that we've had this snuffing out. I also looked at Tiffany in Westlaw, and Tiffany's been cited about 50 times. So that also seems to me, since Nelson's book, that he hasn't been snuffed out. And I have to confess that 5 of those citations are in things I wrote, but still they're the other 45. Another area where I have some reservations is this public meaning idea. And Randy cites Goodell, where he rules out the historians and so on. I don't think if you're really looking at the accepted public meaning of terms, you can rule out any of the context. You can't rule out history. You can't rule out the rest of these things. So I don't think these people are really doing, the radicals are not really doing public meaning. For instance, look at the 3/5 clause, or look at the clause that provides for the return of fugitive slaves. Sure, they use euphemisms. If you accept, as I believe, that everybody knew what they meant, nearly everybody knew what they meant, including a lot of people who didn't like them, well, then that is the public meaning. You can't get rid of it. Now, I'm much more sympathetic to the anti-slavery constitutionalism as to the due process clause, because there, I think, there is a meaning to due process, which is widely accepted, and the question is simply the scope. Will it include free blacks, for instance? Will it include slaves? And as to that, it seems to me you've got a principle and you've got an expected application. And Jack Balkin's written about this. Congressman Monroe in 1871 wrote about it. What he says is, you have these principles, and then we're surprised when people give them new applications. But if you look at it carefully, it's a reasonable application of the principle. So I think that's sort of different. But I don't think what's really going on is public meaning. What's really going on, I think, is something else. The radicals are attempting to change the conventional understanding of some of these words. And 3 cheers for that. But it's not that they're looking at what the public understanding was. They're attempting to change the language game. And to the extent you succeed, you can change such things. On Bingham. Bingham is somebody who Randy sees as a transmission belt for this anti-slavery thought to the 14th Amendment and so on. And boy, there are a lot of connections. He comes from the abolitionist area of Ohio, and a lot of the ideas are similar. Randy reaches some conclusions that I have doubts about. He says, Bingham's invocation of the Supremacy Clause suggests that he anticipates these rights will be protected by the judiciary, not the federal government. I have a couple of reservations with that. One is, if you read the Supremacy Clause, it is this Constitution and laws made pursuant thereto. So the Supremacy Clause recognizes legislation. But in addition to that, when Bingham is explaining the version of the 14th Amendment, what he says is it will allow the people of the nation to do what they've never been able to do, that is, by congressional enactment, to protect all the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. And Howard also. How are these rights, after he lists the Bill of Rights and so on, how are they going to be enforced? He refers to congressional action. So I think that is overstated. But basically, I think that there is a really remarkable thing going on in this paper. And what's going on is looking at these people who Randy says have been too much neglected, and I completely agree with that, and finding a remarkable coherence on citizenship, on privileges, immunities, on due process, and the rest. The area where I have I'd like some more support is on privileges or immunities. I think it's pretty clear and how comprehensive they are. I think Randy reads them as including state law rights. And I think, that unquestionably it would to some extent, because if you have Bingham's idea that you're going to enforce all the rights in the Constitution, Article 4 is among them, so it would be included. Except for Joel Tiffany, I don't think you get a really clear statement that these privileges and immunities are fundamental constitutional rights of American citizens. Though I could be wrong about that. I think you get more scattered things. I think you get the most complete discussion in Tiffany. And on a personal note, having urged Randy to read Joel Tiffany for many years, I am delighted to say that he thinks he's a person of central importance. So this is a splendid paper. It's advanced our knowledge in a whole lot of ways, and my concerns about it are quibbles.